Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to another XGen for Beginners video. The focus of this video will be on the XGen modifiers. So let's get started. XGen modifiers are extremely important as they can change the appearance and the behavior of the character's hair or fur. For example, you can generate hair clumps or hair coils for character's hair and change the look of your character. Now I'm going to pick up where I left off in hair part video. You can go to my Patreon page and download this very scene and follow along. So basically what I did in the previous video, I mirrored the guides to the other side and created a region map to do a hair part, and that's where we ended this video. Now we are going to take this to the next level using modifiers. Now, why modifiers are important? Because they obey the procedural workflow. Every single modifier will have a huge impact on the look of this character. The good thing about it is you can change that at any point of time without destroying any previous work. So it's procedural and it's non-destructive. To access the hair XGen modifiers, you need to open the XGen tab on your right hand side and go to modifiers. If you click on the plus icon here, then you get the list of all the modifiers Maya has to offer. Now, some application packages offer these modifiers as nodes, such as Houdini. Some applications offer these modifiers as tools that you can pick and use, such as Maya and of course XGen. Now we have a long list of modifiers. We are not going to explain all of them. That is definitely beyond the scope of this tutorial. We are going to target three. We are going to target clumping, and then we're going to talk about cut, and then we end this session by explaining the noise. I may provide some supplementary content to just dive a little bit deeper into some of these modifiers, but for now let's just introduce them and see how we can use them to enhance the look of the character's hair. So let's get started with clumping. Now we use clumping modifier to clump splines towards the guides that we have created. In real life, clumping happens when the hair is a bit greasy or oily and they get attracted to each other and create cone-looking shapes. It is very important that we understand when and how much clumping we need to apply to the character to get that realism. And of course, having a good reference is always going to help. Now in Autodesk, clumping has to be the first modifier that you use. I'm gonna go to this plus sign here and then get clumping. Now as soon as I go OK, I get a warning and I get no change in the look of the character. The reason is every time you start with clumping or any type of modifier, you always need to set up maps first. So this error is really not an error, it's basically a reminder that you have clumping, which is good. Now go ahead and set up your maps. So you go to all the way down into here. We have setup maps, preview guides, and export guides. We don't deal with these two just yet. We always want to set up maps first. If I click on it and move it to the side, point direction points to the project directory that you've already set. Again, I cannot stress that enough, how important this is to set project before you start with XGen in general. Check out my scene preparation video. Then we have density. Now, density says how much density you would like to get. I'm gonna disable the hair visibility. How much density you would like to get per guide. Now, those guides, if I go ahead and press just generate, you can see, if I zoom in, those guides will be the guides that the hair will be attracted to. And as a result, we get clumps. If I go lower and generate, the space between each guide will be wider. As a result of that, your clumps are gonna get bigger. If I increase this and go generate, you get more clump guides, and as a result of that, your clumps will be finer and smaller and thinner. Now, the million-dollar question is, what number should I put in there? And again, this is something that you need to look at your reference, you need to look at the size of the model, and usually, we'll get to that later, but usually one clumping modifier is not enough. You start with big clumps and then you break it down into finer clumps using additional clumping modifiers. So I'm just going to dull it down to 1 and go generate and press save. As soon as you do that, you can see now it's breaking down. The hair is attracting to the clumps that we created. Now if I go to preview guides, you can see now each yellow guide has turned to a hair, and these are main strands of hair, the XGen primitives that the hair that we create will be attracted to. So I can go to setup map. You can see that every single line that we have, the base, they share the same base, the preview guides and the clumping guides that we have, and based on that we get our clumping. It's really important to see how this works. So if I go and preview the hair, you can see every clump is actually, if the hair is here and it's closer to this guide, it will get attracted to this guide and it will be part of this clump over here. Now we have additional attributes in here too. The first one is clump, and that is the amount of clumping effects applied to the primitive. So if I set this one to 0, we get no effects. In a sense, it's more like an intensity. I can go and meet it halfway there, and we have half of the intensity of the clump, and I can go full clump effect, and that's what we get. Then we have clump scale. Tool lets you to scale the magnitude of the clump. So we have the root and we have the tip, and you can come up with interesting results if you want. So if I sort of zoom in and have a look, you can see I'm kind of making it very well defined. The base of a clump can be wider or it can be narrower, as you can see, which creates a funny looking result, but you get the gist. For the tip as well, you can actually play around with the profile of the clump, give it more volume or lower it down, and based on the density of the guides, the look of this will change. So that's something you can do, and you can kind of change the interpolation, get a smooth if you have a middle point here, so the interpolation is not going to be as angular and jagged. So if you do use any additional points, make sure the interpolation is set to smooth. Then we have clumping variance, which lets you vary the clumping effect on a pre-primitive basis. It basically adds more chaos, but again, we can do that with a noise modifier. I tend not to touch this. It's a very kind of touchy attribute, and at least I don't know how to use this as well as the noise modifier. So I do use noise modifier to vary or to break up the pattern of my clumps, But again, if you don't want to use other modifiers, this is a sort of a temporary solution to that. Now I think this clump works for me, so I'm just going to go ahead and add an additional clumping here. So with clump 2, very similar to clump 1, I need to set up maps. I'm just going to close the previous one, and this time a rule of thumb is to any value you would like to add to this needs to be higher than the previous value. Otherwise, the type of effect that you get is going to be highly unrealistic. I usually go 3 times or 4 times than the first clumping that I have. So if the first one, as a matter of fact, I would like to give the first clump a value of 2 and save. And for the second clump, go with the value of 6, generate, so I get more refined clumps, and save. And now if I rotate, I can see that in each big clump, I get a finer clumps. And again, it's up to you how you want to break this down. I usually go to the first clump and make it not as big. Go to the second clump, and it's what I'm doing is good, but one thing I would like to show you, if I go to setup map in the first one, if you have an attribute called mask, and that mask, I usually set it to 0.9, it adds randomness to your clump. So if I go in here and save, you can see not every single clump is now identical. Using the value of 6 and for max 0.9 and generate, and you can see you get a kind of a better, more organic result. Now you may say, Reza, this is really artificial, which is expected from clump. Remember, we haven't added other modifiers to it. I'm going to go ahead and add another clumping to it as well. I'm going to be a little bit gentle with this one. I'm going to go with probably 18, set the mask to 0.8. This is going to be really, really refined now. So every single clump has got subclumps and subclumps, and then maybe I'm going to reduce that just a tad, so on and so forth. Now we have mask and clump. We talked about clump, which is the intensity. Mask is the spread. So if you set that one to 0, basically you're turning off the clump, so the spread can be controlled via here. So I can actually go in here, scroll up, and set the spread to something like 0.9, make him just a tad wider, like so. And that's how you approach clumping. Now, one adjustment I can make to or apply to this scene is I can control the clump better. So what do I mean by that? We have enough amount of clumping here, but I think it's a bit too much on the sides and the back of the character. Probably here, yes, but the bottom areas and a little bit of side, I can reduce it, not to remove it altogether, but to reduce it. The way you control it, obviously, we talked about this, is through maps, PTEX maps that you apply to any channel you want. In this case, we have mask, and we can create a map based on that. So I'm going to go to scalp, bring this over, and make sure it's not frozen. I can get rid of or disable the visibility of the hair and show the guides. Now with that selected, I can go to my first clump and go to mask and create a map. As usual, I would like to always name my collection and description. So this is going to be collection, it's clump 1, and of course I'm using the mask value. I'm going to increase the map resolution from 5 to 12, and I want white color, so I want clump to be applied to everything, and then I can paint out clumping by applying dark color, which removes values. So now I'm ready to go. I can probably get rid of that. I'm going to definitely bring up my art zone tool, the tool settings. Now here is the debatable area. You remember I talked about hair part and how important it is to use solid brush. Because I actually don't want to remove the values altogether, so I really do not wish to use completely black color, then using soft brush is okay. I can actually go to stroke and enable reflection. So if I want to apply something, I have symmetry applied. And stylus pressure, I tend not to use stylus pressure. It does create a little bit artifacts, so I always tend to turn that off. But again, one of the exceptions that I actually do use soft brush, but 90% of the time I actually don't. Now I'm gonna go to, I would like to play around with numerical values. So maybe I'm gonna use 0.4 and hold down B, drag to have a better fall off, and I'm going to sort of brush and paint around that side. Now I believe that's a bit too much. I'm gonna go to 0.6 and try again. That is definitely better, because I really don't want to remove the clumps. You need to be very careful not to ruin the effect. And then I'm gonna reduce it to 0.4 and kind of create that area, maybe going to 0.3 and paint over that area, and probably paint over that area as well. And this area can be actually 0.3 altogether. Now, again, very rarely I use blur, but again, in this case, I tend to use blur because I really don't want the audience to see where the fall off takes place. So you do need to blur the effect. I think that definitely works for me just fine. That's good. Oh, I believe I actually applied blur in here by accident. There you go. We removed it. Gotta be quite careful about it. Yeah, that actually should do the trick. Now, as usual, you never want to forget about that. You want to save the texture here, and you want to save the texture here. That's better. Now, if I go and turn off my guides visibility, you can see the amount of clump, the first clump, is not as significant. We still have the second clump and the third clump, which is good, but the first clump, the most pronounced one, is very well controlled. Yep, that definitely did the trick for me, and I'm actually quite happy about this now. Now, with that done, let's move to the next modifier, which is a cut modifier. Now let's continue with another modifier. Just so you know, between sessions I went ahead in clumping 2. I generated COLL for collection, clump 02 mask, and I assigned exactly the same map that I assigned to clump 1 to clump 2, so the kind of back area is even more controlled. So feel free to spend the time and assign maps to all clumps if need be to get a more desirable look. Now, with clumping done and out of the way, I can now go to my add modifier window, and this time I'm going to add a cut modifier. Now, cut modifier is probably one of the few modifiers that come with an expression ready to go, and I kind of love that about this modifier. It makes the job a lot easier if you even don't know how to work with expressions. In this case, the expression is very simple. It says randomize, pick every single hair, randomize, and basically cut it from 0.0 to 0.2. Now remember, this is the world unit, And again, based on the preparation video that we have, we already know that not only we need to set project, we only need to clean the geometry, we also need to be mindful of the world unit. Are we working on CM or M? And based on the world unit, you may get a slightly different look. Now, this mask here obviously works the same way as masks in clumping, the way we use this in clumping. So if you do not wish to get cut in certain areas, you can go ahead and generate a map. Just keep that in mind that unlike clumping, this mask attribute won't get decimal values. So it's very Boolean looking attribute. It's either 0 or 1. You either want to have the cut or you don't want to have the cut. If you wish to use numerical values, if you wish to use mask, you can actually use ptex map and fine-tune the look of your cut. So if I move closer and see with, without, we get a slightly different level of randomness in here. You can actually increase this value to get a more randomized looking hair. So it tends to make the hair slightly shorter if you really increase this value. Now we have keep parameter and reparam, or keep param and reparam. It's important to know what they do. Keep param, if you have a CV, and if I go into primitives, it's probably easier to explain this to you. We have modifier CV count, and we explain this in our guide videos. Now, if you have 9 points, 9 CVs on your guide, if you reduce it to half with this modifier, you will get around 3 or 4 if you set your rebuild type to keep param, because you lose the other 4 because you cut it, right? In reparam, it actually rebuilds the spline by sort of redistributing the CVs based on the new length. So you still get to keep 9 CVs on your shorter hair. It's not going to throw away 4 CVs because you simply cut the hair in half. So keep that in mind. I tend to set or keep reparam on, not to switch to keep param, because keep param gives you lower resolution. Of course, too much resolution can also be a problem, but in this case, it's a safer choice. Now, you may say, Reza, it's a bit confusing, you know, going through the world unit values and just do a trial and error. Can we just simplify the process where we just look at the length of the hair and we would like to cut a percentage based on the length of our hair? The answer is yes, but you need to create a slightly different expression. So what I can do is just to press Ctrl X to temporarily cut the expression out of this amount. You start with 0 because we don't know what sort of value would be the right one. Remember, the range is always from 0 to 1. 0.5 is half of the value. So we start with 0 and then multiply and $, lowercase c, length, and enter. Now, so far it's not happening, nothing is happening, but as soon as I increase this to something like 0.2, you can see it makes a change. Now, I found this little expression a godsend, something that you can easily control the hair. I can reduce the length of the hair to half by just putting this to 0.5. And there we have it. It's very well groomed now. You can even take it really, really high and then get a much, much shorter hair in no time at all. I found this much more effective than the randomized expression that we had. But again, definitely an optional choice of yours if you wish to use randomize, again, that's all good as well. I always use opportunities like this to kind of come up with new tips and tricks, and you may find this useful. So you can see now before, after, before, after. If I zoom in especially these areas, you can see before, after, before, after. So it adds a little bit of randomization, and it cuts the hair, and it kind of creates, it gives you a control over your groom. I found that slight value, just a tiny value and cut with this type of expression, when you set the rebuild type to repram, can really tame your groom. We're done with this modifier. Let's move on to the next one, which is the noise modifier. Next one on the list is noise. So I'm going to go and click on this plus sign to bring the add modifier window, and from here I am going to select noise. Now it's one modifier that will rely on your, if I go to primitives tab, on your modify CV count heavily. Now if I lower this to something like 2, you can see it kind of destroys the entire clump, and I can actually bring it or crank it up to something like 25, and you get a very, very detailed looking noise on top of your cut modifier. So keep that in mind. Higher value doesn't necessarily give you best result. If anything, it actually slows down your scene. So don't just throw in a very high value and hoping that everything will look good because of it. Be very careful with this number and why you're increasing this number. So but I usually set my noise modifier from 9 to 15. In this case, I'm going to go with 15. I think it's a reasonable value from my CV count, because I've got a slightly longer hair. The longer the hair, the higher this value should be. Now I'm going to go to modifier, and let's look at what we have here. We have mask. Obviously mask does what this attribute does in every single modifier. So basically you can include or exclude part of the scalp to receive this modifier and give it an intensity based on the PTEX map that you're creating. We did the same thing with clumping. Frequency is something that I noticed some users actually overuse this. Again, very similar to CV count. You don't want to come up with crazy number in here, otherwise I've even seen Maya crashes because of that. So if you would like to get fizziness, for lack of better word, more waviness, then increase this number to something like 3 or 4, and that gives you higher frequency for the hair, so the hair has got more waviness in it. If you want to have a very, very kind of soft looking hair with just a subtle curve on it, then you can reduce it to something decimal below 1, something like 0.5 will get the job done. Magnitude is obviously the intensity. You can go crazy high with it and you intensify the effect. Then I'm going to lower the magnitude to just compensate the frequency, to compensate for that. So again, with that value, don't go too high unless you really need to. I'm going to bring this one back to 1 for now. We're just working with default setup. Magnitude scale has got a massive impact on the look of your scene. So basically we have the root and we have the tip of the hair. This says the root doesn't get any noise. The tip gets all the noise and that interpolation in the middle. What I usually like to do is to kind of create an arc and create a soft looking fall off rather than just a straight linear line. Makes the interpolation much better from the root to the tip, where you gradually, if you look at the bright areas, not the dark areas, if you look at the bright areas, that would be the profile for the hair, and that's how noise will get assigned. So the wider portion gets less noise, and as we move forward we get more and more noise. Then with correlation and preserve length. These are more advanced topics. We are not going to talk about that right now. But if I look at here, you can see now we are getting more of a afro looking shape. This is not really what I want. So in cases like this, you just need to compromise and create chaos. The way that you create chaos is with magnitude. So I'm going to increase the magnitude, and at the same time I'm going to lower the frequency, and that is going to create a bit of a blend with what I have in the hair. As usual, just like any other modifier, you probably need more than one level of noise to get the job done. And as always, I tend to use mask and p-tex maps to sort of control what area needs what. Now, you may have noticed that I have a little bit of patchiness that doesn't come from the noise necessarily. It actually comes from my clumping. So the reason I'm showing you this is because it is very, very common that you sometimes go through your clumps and you try to change the look of your clump to sort of find a better blend between your modifiers. So it is actually quite necessary sometimes for you to go back, have a look, and see what changes you can make to get a better looking noise. Now I'm going to go in here. Probably what I need to do is going to go here and lower the density just a tad to see what I'm doing. It's probably too much density that I have right now. And then go to modifier and start tweaking this noise. Now, before I do that, I feel like I need to intensify the cut in here and lower it on the top. So again, part of the process, we always make compromises like this. So I'm going to go to scalp, bring the scalp in, hide the hair, bring the guides in, and then go to mask and create a map. 12 will get the job done as usual, COLL, and this time I'm going to go with a cut. We have only one cut, so I don't need to put 0 in or 2. Now I'm going to again go with the white color. I'm going to double click, and the effect is set to blur. I'm going to go and pick the soft brush, so I have access to soft brush, and I start painting these areas like so, because I really don't want to shorten the hair in this area. Maybe even I want to extend it to this bit and moving it like so. So I think that is going to do the trick for me. I'm going to undo, starting here, and again fine-tuning it like so. So I think that's good. I'm going to quickly go to blur and blur this area as well, so it's not really as noticeable. That works. I'm going to go save texture. I'm going to go in here, save texture, and that's better. You can see now I can easily go into, I'm going to hide the scalp first so we get to see what's going on. I can go and increase this to something like 0.2 and get a shorter hair on the top while we're not having an impact on the top area. I can now bring back my light, my shadow, my ambient occlusion. Remember, when you paint, better to turn off these values so you kind of see what you're doing. That's better. So now the hair is, at least around the side, is not as thick. Another thing I wish to do is to go to my clump and change the look of them ever so slightly. I'm going to go to clump 2. Clump 2 is okay. Clump 3, I probably want to lower this down and even de-intensify the effect a little bit. And I'm not sure if you guys see this, but it kind of creates a really nice stray hair. If I go set to 1, compared to something like 0.1 or 0.2. Slightly different result, but I think that gives me a much better look all in all. So it's not as clean. I'm gonna turn off the visibility of the guides. So for the first one, the first noise I'm gonna go to use, I can probably lower this ever so slightly, like so. I'm trying to use lower points. Then ever so slightly increase the magnitude to blur these areas and lower the frequency, because with higher frequency, just to show you, I'm getting a super freezy look, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to sort of lower this to 0.03, maybe increase the magnitude ever so slightly so the clumps will blend better. 9.5. So I think that's a good place to be. So I think as my first noise modifier, that has done a decent job. Again, feel free to go in here into your clumps and play around with them. You can see I'm lowering them. I'm getting a sort of a different look. So always try to play around with your clumps after noise, just to make sure that you are getting a decent result. I'm gonna go to cut, try it with 0.5 maybe, it's just too much. Switching back to actually 0.2, that's better. 0.25, maybe 0.3 was the right value. Yeah, definitely. So that's the process, that you have to just go and play around, tweak certain stuff. Even I can tone down the noise a little bit, so to bring back a little bit of clumping I had before. So I have the noise, but again, the problem with that is you get that sort of look. So again, one good example where you can actually use a map to your advantage. So let's actually quickly do that. I'm going to turn off these fancy display attributes, bringing the scalp back, making the guides visible so I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna go to the mask and create a map. I'm gonna call this collection, COLL, and then noise. This time I'm going to go noise 1 because I am going to use noise quite extensively. Maybe I will be having the second noise as well. The attribute that I'm applying the map to is a mask. As usual, I always set the start color to white. I'm going to go in here, double click on my artisan tool. My blur is selected. I'm switching to the soft select. Gonna go in here and change it to 8 and start painting on the scalp. Actually, I want to get more noise around here and I want to get less noise on the top. So with the brush I have, I'm going to start adding sort of a black, very gentle 0.8 value black color, like so. I'm going to zoom in so you guys get to see what I'm doing. So I want to apply less noise in here and more noise in here. That's what I'm doing. Again, as usual, switching to blur and blurring this area. Don't really want to have a very well defined line. That really should do the trick. Probably missed the spot here. Done. As usual, save and save in there, and then hopefully I will be getting a less amount of noise at the top and more noise on the sides. I'm gonna hide the scalp, I'm gonna hide the guides, and indeed that is the case. So you can see that it is really up to you how you play around with your guides, but that is the process. Now I am going to continue on this very scene just to add the secondary layer of noise with stray hair on the top. The reason I don't want to kind of continue with this session because it's getting a bit too lengthy, and if you're following along with this scene, which is available on my Patreon, probably you need to set some time aside and do some tweaking, maybe add additional maps. You can even add maps to the frequency and to the magnitude as well. I think it's a good idea to have separate maps for certain areas just to get the best result. I'm probably going to go and play around with the frequency and add a map for the frequency, maybe less frequency on the top and more frequency on the sides, up to you and your design. I'll leave it with you to play around with it, but in the next video we are going to come back and add more modifiers, or maybe singular, a modifier to what we already have, and basically finalize the modifier side of things, and it will leave us with look dev, lighting, shading, so on and so forth. So to be continued. Talk to you guys soon.